Hello, everyone. Welcome to the University of the Underground. We are a free, pluralistic, and transnational university and charity founded in 2017 in the basement of a nightclub in Amsterdam. I am Naum, the head of program of I Want to Believe, an investigation into religion and belief systems as a part of a 3-month practice-based residency where we are unraveling belief systems and the relationship with politics, society, economics, and nation states. I would like to welcome our researchers today and to any visiting participants or anyone else watching this video. I kindly ask you to support the university and donate whatever you can in our website so we can keep having these tuition-free programs. Today we're going to have a talk. It's going to be 40 minutes and then 15 minutes for Q&A. And I would like to introduce you to our special guest today, Felipe Neis Araujo. Felipe is a Brazilian anthropologist concerned with social justice, drug policies, state violence, structural racism, and repair for historical inequalities. He holds a PhD in social anthropology from the Federal University of Santa Catarina, Brazil. And Felipe has done plenty of work, but he has also conducted field work with Rastafarians in Kingston, Jamaica, and published works on the politics of Rastafarian language and gender and violence in Jamaica. So today he's going to go further into this topic to discuss the radical politics of the Jamaican Rastafari movement. So Felipe, welcome to the stage. It's all yours.
Thank you so very much, Naum. Good afternoon to everyone, to all the brilliant students. I would like to thank very much for joining me today here. Before I start, I would also like to thank Nelly, Naum, Victoria, and the whole team of this brilliant organization named the University of the Underground. I am both humbled and honored by this opportunity to come here and speak to you about other possible worlds. Because if there is one great lesson that we can learn from studying other modes of existence through anthropological, ethnographic lenses, is that the way we live is historically, sociologically, semantically created by human beings. That there is no reality in or by itself. And the austerity and brutality we have been experiencing with the rise of neoliberalism might feel like the result of a stronger metaphysical power that is beyond the grasp of civil society. But it is not. And I would like to quote Ursula Le Guin, the famous anarchist writer, daughter of the great anthropologist Alfred Kroeber. She once said, and I open quotation marks, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. But then so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art. So go on, artists. Let's blaze the trails of change and transformation." And I would like to inspire you today and think with the experience of the Jamaican Rastafari movement, a Black radical Caribbean movement that emerged in the 1930s. Let me share my screen with you. Can you please enable now
Yes,
the screen sharing? Thank you so much. And let me put it here. So my lecture today bears the title, "The Radical Politics of the Jamaican Rastafari Movement." And why do I say that the Rastafari movement is a radical movement? First, we need to think about this concept of radical, because I do not want to conflate the idea of radicalism with extremism. And I definitely do not want to conflate the idea of radicalism with violence. So I want to think of the notion of radical as grasping the roots. It's a notion that is inspired by Professor Angela Davis's. And here there's a quote where she says, if we are not afraid to adopt, sorry, if we are not afraid to adopt a revolutionary stance, if we wish to be radical in our quest for change, then we need to get to the root of our oppression. After all, radical simply means grasping things at their roots. And of course, that this beautiful passage from Professor Davis is inspired by that old Prussian gentleman from the 19th century. I'm talking about Karl Marx, who said that to be radical is to grasp the root of the matter. And I want to think that in order to grasp things at the roots, we need to think about radicalism in a different way and think with the question that is animating this program, I Want to Believe. How can we radically reframe our belief systems being political, economical, and sociological within and outside of institutions? Well, grasping things at the roots in order to change social reality comes with a cost. It comes with resistance from the dominant classes. It comes with resistance from conservative peers. It is most likely to face state violence, denial, erasure. It becomes a struggle, class struggle, if you like. But things are not going to change by just closing our eyes and waiting for them to change. Transformation requires radical ideas and radical action. It requires a radical struggle. And how can we think about radicalism associated to religion, which seems to be something, a conservative force? Is religion in itself conservative? We're going to get there to this matter soon. But I want to think with you about religion as a belief system. We need to think of religion not as something in itself. We need to think of religion as something that cannot be separated from language and action. We need to think of religion as the act of practicing religious acts, of thinking through and with a religious language. So religion, if we need to define it, close definition could be a cultural, dynamic repertoire of utterances, gestures, images, discourse, narratives. And we need to think of religion as a mode, as a modality of relating things, making relations between things, between events and people and things and processes, and making sense out of experience. So we need to think of religion not as something in itself, but we need to think that it is a social and political practice, a constant mobilization or performance of discourses, practices, action. And if we want to go with Jacques Derrida perspective on religion, we have to think that we need to take religion into account, if possible, in an irreligious or even irreligious manner. What religion at present might be, as well as what is said and done, what is happening at this very moment in the world, in history, in its name. So basically what Derrida is saying there is that we need to think of religion as action. Mhm. Again, not as something in itself, not as a metaphysical power in itself, but what do people, what do collectivities do in the name of religion? What do they do with their religious discourse, with their religion imagery? What do they do with their religious repertoire? Mm? And in order to think about what Rastafari is in terms of religion and why it is a radical movement, a radical political theology, we need to think about the history of this movement. And we need to think about the context that allowed Rastafari to become Rastafari. So I'm taking you back to Jamaica in 1930, to the roots of the Rastafari movement. We need to think that in the 1930s, there was a growing popular agitation against the British cultural rule. Almost 100 years after emancipation, labor and citizenship situation of the Black people were analog to slavery. And it is not by chance that until today, slavery is a recurrent theme, a leitmotif in Jamaican musical tradition. But back in the 1930s, this growing discontent has found a potent, a powerful ally in Marcus Garvey and his Back to Africa movement. So Marcus Garvey, he fought for the return of the Black people to the African continent, and he defended his cause as a publisher, as a journalist, and as an entrepreneur. He was born in Jamaica, but he lived part of his life in the United States of America and also in the United Kingdom. And he got very well acquainted with the universal struggle of Black people on both sides of the Atlantic. He was the founder of the United Negro Improvement Association and incorporated a shipping line whose aim was to facilitate the transport of Africans in the diaspora to the African continent. His ideas, which intertwined Christianity and politics through biblical language, reached a wide audience and inspired many followers known as Garveyites. And even though the Garveyites and the first Rastafarians, there was a bit of a conflict between them, many of people who would become Rastafarians in the 1930s came from a Garveyite background. And this happened in the context of the coronation of Haile Selassie of Ras Tafari as Haile Selassie the first emperor of Ethiopia, which has awakened a new sense of pride in being African. And this pride of being African from one side with the coronation of Black King, and on the other side with the strong activism of Marcus Garvey for the rights of Black people in having reparation for historical violence of colonialism, in the right to return to Africa and being recognized as African citizens. They have met Jamaica in this turmoil, in this agitation against British colonial rule, and Rastafari has emerged from that. And if we go back to 1920, in one of his speeches, we can see Marcus Garvey's radical approach to citizenship and belonging. He said to a crowd in 1920 in Jamaica, wheresoever I go, whether it is England, France, or Germany, I am told this is a white man's country. Wheresoever I travel throughout the United States of America, I am made to understand that I am an N-word. If the Englishman claims England as his native habitat, and the Frenchman claims France, the time has come for 400 million Negroes to claim Africa as their native land. You see there the roots of what we would start calling Pan-Africanism in this discourse by Marcus Garvey, thinking about the historical experience of African people who were taken from Africa through slavery to the what was then called the New Road to America, plantations, and also to urban centers later in the history. And then after the abolition of slavery, they just become second-class citizens without rights, without access to justice, without access to land, in an analog condition to slavery. And this question of the suffering of Black people in the diaspora and in Africa was also a topic of Haile Selassie, as many of Haile Selassie's discourses. And taking back to 1930, to the coronation of Ras Tafari as Haile Selassie I, the Ethiopian Black Messiah. You see two covers of the Time magazine. Actually, the first cover you see on your left was the one that brought the news of the coronation of Haile Selassie to Jamaica. So after the coronation of Haile Selassie in a country with a long tradition of Ethiopianism in the Anglophone Caribbean, the Rastafari movement was born. And to cut a long and complex history short, Ethiopia appears in the Bible as a synonym to the African continent. And in the discourse of religious leaders of the 19th and early 20th centuries, including Marcus Garvey, it has been associated with the redemption of the Black people. So Haile Selassie I was crowned within the Orthodox Christian tradition of the Ethiopian Coptic Church. And after images and narratives of his coronation arrived in Jamaica on the cover and the inside pages of Time magazine, several popular prophets started to frame this event as the return of the Messiah. They started preaching the return of the Messiah in Kingston, Jamaica's capital, and its surroundings, and saying that that was the fulfillment of the biblical prophecy that the Savior would return to lead his chosen people to glory, redemption, and peace. In the movement's oral tradition, Haile Selassie I is Jah, the Almighty God, who came to break oppression, rule equality, wipe away transgression, and set the captives free. This is part of the lyrics of a very traditional Nyabingi chant, which is Rastafarian ritualistic music. So Haile Selassie's coronation and reign has become a strong symbol of hope for the growing Rastafarian movement. Ethiopia, as the only country in Africa that had not been colonized or dominated by European empires, has provided also this strength, this notion that it was a chosen place, that it was a holy place. We know that with the help from Churchill, Selassie's armed forces resisted Mussolini's invasion, and he defeated the Italian fascist army. This campaign was translated into accounts of Ethiopia's victory over Rome, or the victory of a true Christian warrior against those who commit crimes and injustice in the name of Christ. Moreover, the notion that Haile Selassie I was or is God in flesh operates a strong political ontological shift. God is no more a dead white man, but a living Black man. The image and likeness of the Creator is embodied in a dark-skinned man that is named the power of the Trinity in Amharic. That's what Haile Selassie means, and whose followers will call the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the conquering lion of the tribe of Judah. So from here, we need to think again, coming back to Derrida, what is said and done in the world, in history, in its name, in the name of religion. And we need to think here, what have Jamaican Rastafarians done in the name of Christianity? What do Rastafarians do with biblical mythology? Why do I call Rastafarian theology a radical politics of existing? And here we need to think about this idea, this articulation of a sociological, a historical experience through a religious language, which is a subversion of this language. But in the terms of Jacques Derrida, is a translation and a political translation. It's actually in the process of reading this, interpreting, and putting into action, that translation, cultural translation, takes place. So we are here thinking with a movement that takes a religious text, that takes a religious tradition, and translates its own cultural, sociological experience through that language. And in that language, there is an articulation of Christianity, anti colonialism, and Pan Africanism. We see here how a religious discourse has a political aim, how these narratives, they are mobilized in order to reach things that people want, need, things that people desire, things that people claim they have rights to. And in here, with the Rastafari movement, we see that the religious discourse and its political aim is rights and justice for the Black people in Africa and in the diaspora. Taking it back to this question of inequality, of racism, and of the status of a second-class citizen of the Black people all around the world, we have this very famous excerpt of discourse that Haile Selassie gave to the UN in 1963, that later was transformed in a beautiful song by Bob Marley and the Wailers. And there in that occasion, Haile Selassie, he said that until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned, that until there are no longer first class and second class citizens of any nation, that until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, that until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race, that until that day, the dream of lasting peace and world citizenship under rule of international morality will remain but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained. Until all Africans stand and speak as free beings, equal in the eyes of all men as they are in the eyes of heaven. Until that day, the African continent will not know peace. We Africans will fight if necessary, and we know that we shall win, as we are confident in the victory of good over evil. We see here in this excerpt from the Haile Selassie's speech an articulation of race with religion, and we see the idea of Africans who are on the good side over those who are oppressing Africans who are on the evil side. We think is a great theme in a Rastafari tradition, this dualism, bad, good, evil, good, high, low, but this is a discussion for other moment. So these excerpts from Haile Selassie and from Marcus Garvey, they have informed Rastafarians with a theory, with a political position, a radical politics of belonging. If you are Black, you are an African. Marcus Garvey has said that Africa is for Africans in the continent and abroad. Pan-Africanism is this idea that everyone who's got African heritage is an African, and that Africans should unite and seize back the continent, the land from which they were loathed from. And this notion also that started with Marcus Garvey strongly, that Black people are on repatriation, it has become a strong tenet of the Rastafarian movement. They have been doing pilgrimage to Ethiopia and other African countries, and been settling in African countries since at the very least the early 1960s. And oh, sorry, I don't know why. Let me go back. Okay, so again, apologize. the Rastafari movement forces the Jamaican state to remember slavery and its aftermath. It forces the state to recognize, to deal with the fact that violence and the violation of human rights are part and parcel of its history, of the history of state formation. By this idea of remembering slavery and remembering here, I'm thinking about memory in the sense of a collection of a set of themes instead of the rememoration of lived episodes. Many of these people who sing about slavery, Rastafarians today, Rastafarian priests and Rastafarian artists, they did not experience the institution of slavery as it was before the abolition, but they have been remembering that the condition that Black people find themselves today in Jamaican society and in other societies is a direct aftermath of the years of slavery and of the racism that spawned from it. And so we see here in the right a placard from a 2015 demonstration when David Cameron visited Jamaica. Many people, many organizations were thinking that he was going there to talk about reparations, but instead he said, look, people really have to get over this story of slavery. It's something in the past, and what I really came here for is to offer you some money to build prisons so that we can deport Jamaican prisoners, and you deal with that. And typical British style. Uh, and again, this notion of slavery, this sociological experience, is framed and described in biblical language, and a very important source for us to think about the experience of the chosen people in slavery is the Psalm 137, which talks about the exile of the Jews in Babylon. So there is this political leitmotif, which is captivity in a strange land, like as the Hebrews, they did not belong in Babylon. The Africans, they do not belong in Jamaica, in Brazil, in the United States of America. Africans, they belong in Africa, and we are captives in a strange land, and we want to come back. We want to settle in our land, and so we see that this theme of the Hebrews enslaved in Egypt is recurrent in the Rastafarian oral tradition. The Hebrews enslaved in Babylon, and also the Africans enslaved in the Americas. Uh, if you are somehow acquainted, familiarized with Rastafarian music, you can remember the recurrence of the notion that Jamaica is Babylon. Mm, and that Africa is Zion. And if you think about this great source, the Psalm 137, it say that by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and we wept when we remember Zion. Uh, jump to the other part. For there, they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And if you would follow with me a cultural translation, a powerful political cultural translation of this psalm, which has become a traditional Nyabingi song, it says, by the rivers of Babylon, there I sat down, and there I wept when I remember Zion. Here I get Babylon as Jamaica, Zion as Africa. For the white man carried I away, captivity required from I a song. How can we sing King Alpha, one of Haile Selassie's names, in a strange land? Again, this theme of captivity in a strange land to frame the sociological experience of the Black people in the plantations in the Americas. And so, with this in mind, I believe that we can say that Rastafari is a radical political theology, and that it operates a cultural translation of biblical mythology. And thinking with Talal Assad, every translation is a political act. because you are choosing which meanings to associate with which narratives and how you are going to mobilize that to cause an effect, which in its turn is what we call the performativity of language. We see that they have understood that with biblical narratives, with biblical discourse, with this tradition, they could discuss and they could talk about, they could reach out to people and speak about race, citizenship, belonging, rights, and justice. And why do I say that this is grasping inequalities by its roots and thinking about grasping something at its roots as this radical movement? Because the Rastafarians, they have understood that in order to change their situation, in order to change the situation of the black man, what they need to do is to change the social structure, is to abolish colonialism, is to build a new road, a different road. They have grasped the matter by the roots. It's not a matter of race, it's a matter of racism. It's not a matter of citizenship, it's a matter of second class citizenship. It's not a matter of belonging, but a matter of colonial rule. It's not a matter of rights, but of state violence. It's not a matter of justice, but injustice. So I think that we can conclude that with religion, with a religious discourse associated with a revolutionary praxis, we can maybe transform things. After years of struggle, the Rastafarian has gotten an official apology from the Jamaican state for the violence suffered historically. But this is not enough. They are still very active and mobilizing their forces to get redressing, to empower people to live their lives with sovereignty. And that is why Rastafari is a radical political theology. Thank you so very much. And I would like to say that you are most welcome to reach out to me via email and follow me on Twitter at Legalize and Repair. If you felt like asking me a question here, but you don't feel comfortable for any reason, please just drop me a line in my email and I'll be mostly happy to write back to you. Thank you so very much.
Bravo. Thank you so much, Felipe. That was wonderful and certainly very enlightening. Yeah, I mean, I would like to invite the researchers to ask any questions if you have. So bring them on. Yeah, Felipe, how did you end up doing this research with Rastafari communities in Jamaica?
Well, let me tell you something. I've always had a great admiration for rebel people. And what took me to read and write history for my BA was the slave movements in 19th century Brazil that put so much pressure on the government that they managed to abolish slavery. There is this popular whitewash mythology that it was a good Portuguese princess that granted abolition. It wasn't. It was a strong movement of people who did not accept to be held captive anymore. And so I started to research the way that Africans and Africans born in the Brazilian diaspora in the south, where I come from, how they were getting more and more acquainted with law, policies, and breaches in the system. So they were managing to practice their music, to practice their folk medicine, and to be tolerated by the government, by police officers, and manage also to disguise these practices and just keep on keeping on. And as I really, one of the things that moves me in life is music. I love music, and there is that song by Steel Pulse, "Life Without Music." I definitely can't go without music. So I've been always a great fan of Jamaican music because it's also a very rebellious musical tradition. And since a very tender age, I loved Nyabingi and reggae.
Yeah.
And when I was in my master's, I was supposed to study another theme until that professor that I love said, look, you only have your master's and your PhD to study whatever you want. After that, you have to go after grants and study what other people want. So do not waste this chance and go study what you want. And so I was very much interested in the Rastafarian language and the politics of cultural translation.
Yeah.
I wrote a master's thesis about it, and then I was lucky enough to secure another grant for 4 years for doing a PhD also in social anthropology, and then I managed to spend almost 1 year in Kingston conducting field work, which is the time of my life that I'll miss the most forever.
Yeah, the joys of being in academia. Perfect. Okay, we have some questions. Thanks, Felipe. Irem, please.
Hi.
Hello.
So my question was about the duality that you were speaking about.
Mm-hmm.
If you're black, you're good, and if you're white, you're bad, and like this duality, and its relation to Pan-Africanism, because from what I know about Pan-Africanism, I learned it through the South African context.
Mm-hmm.
I learned about Ubuntu, for example, like because it's a holistic approach, right? That you have Nelson Mandela building Pan-Africanism or saying things about Pan-Africanism, but in a way that he was talking about Rainbow Nation, you know,
Mm-hmm.
he was talking about a spectrum. And I was wondering what the Rastafari movement thinks about, let's say, mixed race, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or the spectrum in general. What do they think about that?
Mm-hmm. Uh, Thank you very much for the question. It's a very interesting one, and I didn't make myself clear. Is not that for many Rastafarians are most or all black is good and white is evil. I'm talking about duality as something that structures Rastafarian languages pretty much derived from the Christian tradition of like high and low, east and west, and this scheme of duality that guides their perception and their creation of things of meaning of sense. But I mean, anywhere you go, if you go to Jamaica, you see Rastafarians who are married with white European ladies and who have mixed race children. Of course, I'm talking about the Rastafari movement here because I had 40 minutes, but it's much more complex than that. Like Rastafarians do not agree with other Rastafarians. Like you want to see two very different people, put one Rastafarian with another one, and then you're gonna see two very different people who are not going to agree on many of this stuff. Like you'll have plenty of isms and schism within the movement. We can talk about it in another occasion, but from my point of view, this is also something positive. It's something that gives life to the movement and allows it to reinvent itself. But regarding the gender question, I've written a text about it. It's a shame that it's in Portuguese, but I need it's more than time to translate it about this homophobia and gender violence in Jamaica and within the Rastafarian movement. For my interlocutors, from people with whom I live, mm, I didn't see like any positive stance or vision on queer people and their rights. So these guys, they are wrong. And you know that many Rastafarian artists, they had their visas to Europe and America suspended because of some queer initiatives and associations that denounce them for promoting violence through their lyrics and in interviews. And this is something very contradictory, that some people come to me and say, oh, but how come a movement that preaches love and peace is so hateful? But of course, because when I speak about love and peace, and when you speak about love and peace, we are using concepts like, just like religion is not something in itself, like love is not something in itself. Love is always what is love for someone. This is something that the French anthropologist much Miss Levi-Strauss has taught us. So history is not history in itself. History is always history. What is history for someone? Because for someone, history is the history of white dudes who wear suits or military uniforms, and this is history, official history of the state. I mean, you want to see statues of these big men in the narratives and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, like, how come like a movement that preaches love and peace can be so hateful? Because love is a concept. When you think about love in relation to Rastafari, you have to ask yourself, like, what do Rastafarians understand by love? Which is a concept. But there are plenty of texts written by Rastafarian women. If you want, you can get in touch with me. I can share them with you. And there are some currents of feminism within the Rastafari movement. But I mean, don't you expect like it's Judith Butler-like feminism, because it is not. It's just like some people like, oh, the Pope, he's not supporting like a gay couple to get married. I mean, he's the head of the Catholic Church. What are you expecting? I mean, I know it's terrible in the 21st century, as much as it was terrible in the 11th century. But I mean, we have to think that these people within institutions, they also have like an image. They also have a network. They also depend on an image, on their stances. I mean, to get along with people, to get by with their business and everything. And this question of gender in the Rastafarian movement is a very interesting topic, but I think you can learn much more from this lady whose name, unfortunately, I forgot. She got her PhD here in London with a beautiful dissertation on Bobo Shanti women, because Bobo Shanti, they're very orthodox. I suffer from a maniac discursive syndrome, so if I start talking about it now, we're not gonna end until next week. So better if you please kindly send me an email and we can keep on chatting about this, if that's okay.
Thank you so much. Sorry, Nahum, I just want to add something really
Go
quick.
ahead.
The reason why I asked this question was about the reactions that you were speaking about, because this was built against colonialism. So if you shape something as a reaction to something, like if you take something as a reference, if you take Western colonialism, Christianity, and stuff like that as a reference, then of course it's not very surprising that it has dualistic or homophobic or whatever nuances or characteristics. So that's why, like, I was thinking about it, and your answer was really explanatory. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're on the same page.
Great. Jessica.
Well, Felipe already touched on it to some extent. I was wondering what the Rastafari stance on sexuality is. Like, is there room for gender outside the binary? How are LGBT issues? And what's the deal with women's sexual liberation?
So thank you so very much, Jessica, for a question, which is also a very interesting one. I mean, you're making me tempted to light up my cigarette as well once there is no danger of a secondhand smoke here. So let me tell you something. I do not believe that there is space within the Rastafarian movement for a very progressive stance on gender relations. Especially, there is no space, definitely, for a more positive stance on queer sexuality or queer gender identities. And I tell you that, again, maybe you go to Jamaica, you meet some other people and they're going to tell you different. But from my experience, from the experience that I have by reading the literature, already this revolution in the late 80s of the women being empowered to participate in ritualistic discussions was such a huge leap forward, you see, because up to a certain age, women, they could not participate with their own voices. They couldn't even at times sing in ritualistic occasions. They would not be allowed to touch the drums, which are sacred. They would only be allowed to use rattles to accompany the songs and the music. And in some Rastafarian communities, the women, like in the Bobo Shanti camp, the women, they have to be segregated when they have their periods. So for a certain time of the month, they cannot be seen in the main part of the camp, and they are also not allowed to touch kitchen utensils. They are not allowed to deal with food, because they understood as being naturally polluted, and they, whatever they touch, they pollute. Regarding sexuality, let me tell you an anecdote. I was almost 30 years old when I was finishing my field work, and then many Rastas would ask me, how come you're an almost 30-year-old guy and you have no children? What's wrong with you? I said, no, because I mean, I don't think it's still the time and this and this. You know what is your problem, man? Maybe it's that your sperm is not strong enough. You know, you have to drink Guinness beer and Irish moss. Is good for fertility, because man has a mission, which is to populate the world, and you cannot go by your whole life without putting your seed in the road. I said, okay. Now I have two children. Many of my Rastafarian interlocutors, they're very happy with the fact that I'm finally acting according to God's plan. But the many Rastafarians, like one of my interlocutors, he has 11 children with 9 different women. And is not seen as a problem, because he's spreading the seed of humanity. Whereas if you go to Bobo Shanti, who are very orthodox, they say, look, this is not a godly stance. A king has to have his empress and dedicate his life to family life. So these people who claim that they are Rastafarians, but they like sleep with plenty of different women, they do not cultivate a proper intimacy with one lady whom they elect to be their queen, their empress. They are not proper Rastafarians. You see, there is this conflict. And this theme, the theme of gender and sexuality within the Rastafari movement, let me tell you something. If you are thinking of studying that at PhD level, I think there's plenty of room. You can conduct your research in the UK, in Europe. You can conduct your research in the Caribbean. Well, when traveling conditions, when COVID-19 crisis allows it. But there's a hot topic, and I would really like to encourage you to pursue your research on that topic. Thank you very much for your question. I hope I have somehow answered that.
Thank you. You did very well.
Thank you.
Great. Chloe.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I wanted to ask about the David Cameron sign for when David Cameron visited Jamaica, and I wanted to ask more about if there's any like at current demands, because you spoke so much about grasping the roots of the problem, and I wondered, in grasping the roots of colonialism and slavery, if there's any like demands now about how to, for example, what would they demand from Britain? Yeah,
this is one of the questions that I've tried to answer in my dissertation, and in a text that hopefully is going to be published soon. So thank you very much for this question. Yes, there are current demands. I mean, the first demand for reparation that Rastafarians made was officially, it was a telegram sent to the Buckingham Palace in 1958 that King Emmanuel, the founder of the Bobo Shanti order, sent to the Queen, demanding material reparation, that they wanted to go back to Africa, but they don't want it to be taken as a migration, because they are not Jamaican citizens. They are Africans who are loathed from the African continent, and they don't want a plane ticket to migrate. They want that the government of Britain, together with the government of Jamaica, provide the ships to take them back by ship to Ethiopia, because Haile Selassie has granted land to the Ethiopian Road Federation, which is an organization that has ties with the Rastafarian movement. Back, I can't remember precisely if back in the 50s or 60s, I can share a beautiful text by a French historian, Julia Bonacci, with you about it. And so we have the land there in Shashamene, in south of Addis Ababa, and we demand to be taken back there. We did not ask to be brought here. And you, who's a native speaker of the English language, of the British English language, you see this word, how you pronounce, like, sorry for my terrible accent, Caribbean. Many Rastafarians say the word, the name Caribbean, it brings in itself the testament, the witness to the crime of the slavery. Caribbean means carried beyond our borders. In the Rastafarians, like in Jamaica in general, they have this huge taste for playing with language and making puns and transforming the phonemes and the semantic meaning of the word. So early in the Rastafarian movement, they have come like they call it Caribbean because they carried us beyond. And nowadays there is this fund that the Jamaican government launched back in 2019, if I'm not wrong, with some money for redressing the violence of an episode in the 1960s. Or many Rastafarians say, that is not enough. That is not enough. I mean, a check of a few hundred or £1,000 is not going to solve our problem, because the problem is structural. That's why I have to grasp at the roots of the things. What we need here is to tackle the problems of inequality by wealth distribution, land distribution, making sure that children are not going from school to prison, but that they have access to a decent education. And also many Rastafarian organizations, they demand that African history be taught thoroughly in school curriculums, which is also a form of a moral, historical, memorial, if I may put so, reparation. Because the Jamaican state, as many other colonial and settler colonial states, they try to erase this history by not celebrating that date when slaves had an uprising, by not celebrating Emancipation Day. No, let's talk about everything Jamaican, the national motto. Out of many, one people. Comes Max Romeo in the 1960s and sings, I'm an African, don't call I Jamaican. Come the Congos and say, you have to understand that you are a Jamaican-born African man. You black, you African, then done. This thing of calling someone African American, it praises the memory of Amerigo Vespuccio, who was an invader. So these demands, they go beyond of financial reparation. Of course, people want financial reparation. Of course, back in the 70s, there was a mandatory policy, a mandatory law that if you are caught with any amount of marijuana, you'd be sent straight to prison and you have to serve jail time. Many of my interlocutors, they went to prison for a spliff tail like smaller than this one. Plenty of them, plenty. This was a policy that was used to persecute and prosecute Rastafarians. And guess what? Many of these people, they were the main or sole breadwinners of the family. Sending a man like that to prison, it literally ruined generations of that family with financial ruin, social stigma, And then after that, after you go to prison, what is your identity? How does state and many people, conservative people in the community get to know you? Oh, the former con, the ex-prisoner. The guy, he's a criminal. He was arrested. He's been in jail. He served time. Don't get close to him. He's dangerous. You know, these Rastafarian people, they're rascals, they're criminals. So there is this strong fight against the gentrification and whitewashing of Rastafarians, because you get to the airport in Kingston or in Montego Bay, pictures of guys in dreadlocks and blah, blah, blah. But no weed until 2015 because it wasn't legal. But of course, now they have legalized marijuana. Rather, they have decriminalized, because these are two different things. They have decriminalized. But who's getting money with Jamaican ganja? Like the traditional growers, the guys who serve jail time. Blah, blah. No. Big foreign investors, white dudes. It's like that. You first persecute and prosecute a people for doing something, and then it becomes cool. And then how can we make money out of that? And how can we make sure that these people are not going to make money? We are going to make money. They did that with samba in Brazil. They tried to do that with capoeira. See, capoeira. Oh, capoeira. Capoeira is one of the most whitewashed practices. Any black person who would headbutt anyone in the street back in the early 20th century could be arrested for capoeiragem, for the crime of being black and assaulting or defending themselves against someone who is a black person, hit another person, capoeira, send them to jail. And now it's cool. UN, if you follow them on social media, they like put pictures of like white people in Africa dancing capoeira with African children smiling and like, oh, how beautiful, we value cultural heritage, blah, blah, blah. I mean, cultural heritage, I mean, the UN is terrible, but let's not talk about it now. So yes, there are many claims for reparations, many demands. I hope I have somehow responded to your answer. And if you drop me a line, I can send you references and we can conspire against the empires together a little bit more.
Well said. Oh, Felipe, there are still, oh my God, everyone is like, I mean, there are many questions. Can we squeeze one question?
Well, you can squeeze as many questions as you like until my son comes running through that door. It's okay.
And then we end this. Okay,
no
just
problem at all.
Couple of questions. One is, I mean, Irem, this is related to what you just said. I can just read it. What do you think of cultural appropriation? For example, happens in capoeira, it happens with the music and so on.
Yeah, cultural appropriation is a very complex theme. I find that when a government, a state, an institution, a class of people who have systematically persecuted people for those practices, or their ancestors did, and nowadays they have their privileges because of what their ancestors did, and then they just find an opportunity in whitewashing some cultural practice and make money out of that. I mean, this is a huge crime. This is a huge crime, and it's terrible. And there is this British sociologist who writes about the cooptation of the Rastafarian identity. He's got some very interesting texts, and I'm sorry if I'm answering to your question very shortly like that, but I must admit that I am not the best person I know to talk about cultural appropriation. I do not have the proper knowledge. So of course I can read about that. If you want to start a dialogue, you can send me your questions. I can delve deeper into that and come up with some text and everything. But when someone lives out, has profit, exploiting something that was persecuted, and those people who were persecuted in the past do not get redressing, do not get reparations, do not get justice. I mean, those people who are appropriating are committing a crime from my point of view.
I see. Okay, thanks, Felipe. Kayla.
I was curious if or wait, what was it? Oh, I'm curious about if you're concerned at all about misunderstanding the nuances of the Rastafarian movement, being an outsider, like viewing it from an outside lens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a deep question. This is a theoretical, methodological, and ethical question, because it seems that anthropology is a set of tools that allow you to develop your site, your cultural site, that makes you the perfect person to go there and talk about what other people do and what they talk about what they do. But since the 80s, with the publication of that beautiful collection that bears the title Writing Culture, we are much, much more aware of what we do with things that people tell us and what we do with things that we see in the field. And we understand, or we have to understand, as anthropologists, as sociologists, as someone who practices field work, who goes to some location and lives with some people and then is going to write about that people. We have to understand that our point of view is relational. And what I say, I am not talking about that people, that experience. I'm talking about my cultural perception of that experience. There is no such a thing as a culture out there that you can have a neutral point of view and assess it from a neutral point of view. You are always biased. For good or for bad, you are always biased. You have the authors that you read that inform your reading. You have your political stances. You have your aesthetic interests. And every one of these aspects is going to shape the way you look at culture, the way you look at things. And then you come and you write up a research project and you read all the literature and you think you're so sure you can grasp the people's experience, and then you get to the field and you start talking to people, and people, they want to talk to you about other subjects and not that subject that you want to talk about. And you write down your notes, you take your field notes, you confront them, you say to some Rastafarian elder, like, look, that person told me so and so and so. No, 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 no. That person can't tell you that because of this and this and that. So nowadays, instead of like taking the words of like say a privileged interlocutor, someone who's very articulated, who knows plenty of stories, and say, see, this is a very complete interpretation of their own culture, so I'm going to use that as a source to talk about this phenomenon or this social group. No, we value multiple perspectives, and we don't think that what that person know is less than what someone who knows plenty of stories, who has lots of experience. We consider that as someone, people within a culture, they have their own personal, psychological, physical experience of that culture. From my point of view, from the point of view of most people who study performance and who are interested in performativity in language, we acknowledge that the place of culture is in action, is not a cognitive structure, is not any form of metaphysical whatever. Is this repertoire of utterances, this repertoire of discourses, narratives, images. You take everything that points to meaning that is possible to use to generate or to transform meaning. These are cultural things, and how people articulate those things is what interests us. How someone articulates like a biblical book, the coronation of an emperor in Africa, the words of a Jamaican who's now living in New York, the situation of Jamaican people, modern slavery. That's the stuff we're interested in. And we are interested in points of view of many different people. You have to be aware of that. You cannot think that you're going to the field and that you're going to just someone who goes out to mine gold going to come to with a raw gold. It's a different, what we call collecting data in anthropology, in qualitative sociology. is something that deeply involves your personal bias, your stance, your interests. And when you write about someone, you have to make it clear. You have to make it very clear. You cannot act like as you as an anthropologist, because when anthropology was instituted as an academic science or discipline, there was this strong fixation in method, because what makes a science? Method. I have to go to laboratory, use this element and that instrument and that tool, and I can go and follow the paths, and I'm gonna get to the same result as if you know, Kayla or Jessica have done the same experiment, and you say, you know what? As scientists of culture, we have to come up with a method that anyone who goes and study that society gonna come up with the same conclusions. They came up with evolutionism, they came up with culturalism, they came up with a series of schools in order to try to prove that, yes, anthropology is a science of culture because we have method. And then finally in the 80s, we convinced ourselves that we are much, much closer to fiction and literature than we are to physics and mathematics. And so you have to be aware of that, that you might be misinterpreting. And there are several cases in the history of anthropology when natives came up and raised their voices to say, like, you know what this anthropologist is telling about us? This is bullshit. This it doesn't proceed. Many cases with Margaret Mead, you have the famous debate of Garanato Biezekere about culture and being native, the native point of view, and all of that. And well, we can talk about it for days. A very interesting point. So I hope I have somehow managed to answer to your question.
Fantastic. Felipe, thank you so much. You know, as you were speaking, the stars aligned, because I can see that Yvonne Chigot is here. She was one of our lecturers about Black Magic Matters. It was such a, you know, like two of my highlights are here today.
Lovely. Thank you so very much.
So yeah, thank you so much. Felipe, yeah, I really want to, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your reflections, your knowledge in this topic. I insist, it's been very enlightening.
Well, all the thanks go to you and to the students and the staff of the University of the Underground. Let's keep on fighting the good fight. Let's stay together in this one. Lots of loving for everyone, and hope that we can fortunately soon meet in flesh.
Yeah, it will happen.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.